Okay,
7 o'clock.
7 o'clock, our magic number. All right. Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Nina Wolf, and this is Karen Latham. We're going to serve as your moderators this evening on behalf of the UHOPE Coalition. Now, this is a moderated virtual information meeting and Q&A. We're focused on the proposed legislation affecting ESP and open ed. Our goal tonight is to provide clarity and context and to give parents the opportunity to dialogue directly with the bill sponsor and participating representatives. We're going for a respectful, structured format. A few housekeeping rules. We do have all the participants muted so that we have a smooth experience, no background dogs barking or anything like that. Anybody that is asked to participate directly will be unmuted so that they can speak. We have a chat, so please feel free to submit questions through the chat or the Q&A. We have Ian and Brandon, who are our tech and chat team. They'll be monitoring the chat to help organize any questions. And we find that questions often have an underlying theme that's common to several, and they'll help us see that so that we can make sure all of you are heard.
So a little bit about the UHOPE Coalition. We represent a broad range of homeschooling families and organizations all across Utah. Our role tonight, however, is facilitation, not advocacy, and to ensure parent questions are heard clearly and respectfully. The questions we'll begin with were submitted by parents, organized by theme, and shared with Representative Walter in advance. Should we go ahead and get started?
Yeah.
Yep.
All right.
We'll begin with our prepared questions. These reflect the most common concerns raised by parents across the state. Our first question comes to us from Wendy. Wendy is a homeschool mom, and she is asking, she says, every parent deserves freedom of choice. We have been blessed to have multiple homeschooling options that families know, trust, and rely on. UFA is still a bit of a mess with inconsistent rules, vendor price inflation, long reimbursement delays, and laws changing mid-year. Why would the state remove programs like Open Ed and Harmony that have worked well for years, that families rely on, before UFA has demonstrated stability and consistency over time? Why are we taking away options that are working instead of fixing the program that isn't? Representative Walter, what would you say to Wendy?
Yeah, thank you for your question, Wendy. Thank you, Karen and Nina, for the opportunity to join everybody tonight. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my background before I answer your question, Wendy, but I won't forget about it. So this will be my fourth session in the Utah legislature. Before I was involved in the legislature, I served on charter school boards for 12 years. I chaired two different charter schools. I taught at the time Dixie State University for 9 years. I taught economics and finance. I'm not a PhD faculty. I was a practitioner that was teaching courses for that needed to be taught that had a particular perspective. And anyway, really enjoyed that. Um, I have a little bit of an unusual education background in the legislature, primarily because the first year when I was elected, the first year I was in the legislature, I had children enrolled in Utah public universities, so SUU at the time. I had a son enrolled in a district high school, Dixie High School in Washington County. I had two daughters enrolled in charter schools. At the time it was Vista School in Ivins. and I had a son who was homeschooled. And so I joke a little bit about this, but at least for 1 year, I represented nearly all education constituencies in my family. And I just provide that context because I do have some appreciation for why a family chooses to homeschool. A number of my extended family members do. So I understand why people choose that option. I understand why families are choosing other options that are available in our school choice framework, including charter schools and traditional district models. I'm familiar with and understand why our local education agencies, our districts and charter schools are creating online education options. I have a little bit of context, particularly around Utah Fits All. So the very first week of my very first session was Utah Fits All, and the very first night after my very first committee meeting, I spent quite a bit of time on the phone with um, Representative Candace Perucci, the sponsor of that bill, to try and understand what the legislative intent is and what they were trying to accomplish and who it was a good fit for and who it was not a good fit for. And I've tried to remain involved in that particular discussion. I've served in the Education Standing Committee, the House Education Standing Committee, for each of the last 3 years that I've been in the session. This fourth year, I will be chairing that committee and looking forward to the start of the session and the discussion around a range of education topics, starting here on the 20th of January. To Wendy's question. The question is a really, really great question. There's some interesting context around it. And I actually want to show this group. I want to show this group a particular exhibit from one of the Utah legislative audits. And so I should have asked this before, but Karen and Nina, would I be able to share my screen? I think so. Ian,
Ian,
Let's see. I think Ian would be
be the one to ask.
yeah.
if you can authorize me to do that while you're doing that, I think that that'll actually really help. I think that that'll really help illustrate part of the answer to my question. But very briefly, in the state of Utah, we have traditional district. I want to talk about the range of education options right now. We have traditional district in-person learning education options. It's the largest group of students, but it's by no means the only one. We have traditional district online learning options. We have charter traditional in-person options. We have charter online learning options, right? And then we have the hybrid, which is partly what we're here to talk about today, which is either a district or a charter school funded model that provides support for homeschool families. And when we have Utah Fits All, and then we have homeschool without any state resource or state support at all, right? And I'm not suggesting that that comprises all of the education alternatives, but kind of the major lanes that education falls into. So I'm just going to show you the problem that I'm working on, and I think it answers Wendy's question. And I think that this is a group that could probably help me figure out, if ultimately what we're proposing isn't the best solution, what a good solution would look like. But let me go ahead now and I'll just share my screen. I should be able to do that. So in 2024, the state of Utah created or conducted a audit of the open ed program. Now, I realize there's more programs than that. I'm familiar with Harmony that is offered by the Garfield County School District, and I've had long conversations with Superintendent Dodds. We've had a great, he's been very helpful. And so I realize this isn't the only program, but this is the one that the legislative auditors were focused on. And that legislative audit was came at the direction, you can't get a legislative audit approved without support from leadership, the audit committee, which is basically the Senate leadership and the House leadership. And where most of the people on this call fits are students and parents, students and families, right here, where you're participating in a program that is supported by, whether it's Open Ed or Harmony, but a program like this, a similar program. In this case, it's Open Ed. I should just provide this audit ultimately came as a result of some issues that happened previous to that with the Tooele County School District. In this hypothetical scenario, it's not exactly this, okay? Open Ed is receiving about $1,240 that they receive as compensation for providing the services to parents and families who are using this option, and up to $2,000 is essentially available to parents and students. Okay. Well, where does this money to support this program come from? It comes from a local education agency, an LEA, or a school district or a charter school. So in this context, the primary providers that were evaluated in this audit, they're not the only ones in the state, but the primary ones that were considered in this audit are Gateway Preparatory Academy, a charter school, Nebel School District, and Iron County School District. And when the state appropriates funds to these LEAs, the state was appropriating, and I don't know which is which, but to one of the LEAs, because of the way that the funding formulas, there's nuances around it, $7,300 was going to one, $6,700 was going to another, and $8,500 was going to a third per student. Now, of that, in each case, $3,240 is going to the Open Ed program, under which $1,240 is being retained by Open Ed. The question is, where does the other resource go? All of the other resource. Now, there are students, and in some cases, there's a large number of students that are participating in district programming. But they're not typically on a typical day, they're not participating in the same kind of programming that a full-time in-person student would be participating in. The district is being funded the exact same way. The district is being funded as though your students are full-time in-person students. And so the challenge here is, I think, not about, what's wrong with our the open ed or Harmony, or what the families are trying to do. That's not really the question here. The question here is looking at this allocation of state dollars. We're talking somewhere between 50 and $70 million a year that is going to the districts, that most of that resource, some of it is, don't get me wrong, but most of that resource isn't actually going to benefit the families. And so that's really where the concern is. The concern is, how do we preserve the question is, how do we preserve the ability for the families and the students to participate in the programming without building lots of cash in the school district that's not being allocated to support the students? Because ideally, theoretically, when the state takes your taxpayer dollars and it gets allocated to a local education agency, a school district, in this case, a school district or a charter school or whatever it is, that revenue will actually get to a classroom and a student. And when I say a classroom, it could be a traditional brick and mortar classroom. It could be a virtual classroom. It could be your unique classroom, right? But the question is, how do you get the money into the classrooms where the student is having an opportunity to benefit that learning experience and that learning environment? And what's happening right now is that money is all being held at the administration level in the local education agency. And so I think your question's a really, really great question. We're not really trying to, or we're not, I'm not, I can say, speak for me. I don't have any intent to make this program, for example, go away or to make it more difficult for the students and families to participate if they choose to in a program like this. But we do have a large amount of money that's being held at the LEA level that's not moving through the way that it should. So it's a long answer to your question, Wendy, and I'm sure there's going to be a bunch of follow-ups, but I do think that that context is probably a little bit helpful to see, well, where is this all coming from? And I'll just make one last comment. If anybody's interested, that report is on the legislative website under audit, and then click education, and then you'll see there's an open ed audit under the education audits there, and you can look at it. It's fairly long. I gave you I think what I think is the most important page, but that's a public resource that all of you have access to.
Nicolene has a hand up.
Oh, and thank you, Representative Walter. That was an excellent explanation. I think we all understand the funding a little bit better and how that works. It looks like Nicolene has her hand up. So
Thank you. Sorry, my face isn't on. I'm in a car, and so it doesn't look right anyways. I
That's
appreciate,
all right.
yeah,
Welcome.
I appreciate,
Pat.
thank you, Representative Walter, taking all this time and explaining so much of the backstory, which I think is so incredibly helpful as people are trying to understand what's going on here. I just wanted to make sure that he clarified one thing in his statement. So, Representative Walter, you said you don't want the programs like Open Ed or Harmony Ed to go away. We're just wanting to make sure that the funding goes, in a more direct stream to the families. And so I wanted to make sure that it was kind of come out into the open, that the Harmony Ed and Open Ed and all of those resources that families are used to and that they like could all still be used through the scholarship program. That's correct, right?
So under the original version of the bill that has been that is public, and one of the legislative options. So this is, by the way, if you didn't know, this is my good colleague Representative Peck, who also serves on House Education, and I appreciate her being on and appreciate that. One of the things that the legislative audit recommended was moving the programs, Open Ed, Harmony, to the Utah Fits All. We understand that there are issues with Utah Fits All, program manager administration, and et cetera, which is why we proposed a delayed, phased implementation. But the intent was that everybody that's in the program would be able to move and continue with many of the funding, with the funding essentially going in the same direction. So, yes, that's an important clarification. And yes, the intent is to allow everybody that's in the program, everybody that's benefiting from the program, in a delayed and phased transition to be able to move with Utah Fits All. So I appreciate that clarification.
okay, thank you. I
All right.
Oh, I
We
see.
have a follow-up to the last question from Tiana McCall. If Ian or Brandon can unmute Tiana.
Hi, Representative
Tiana.
Walter. Thanks for having us and hosting this. This is really great of you.
Glad to be here.
I'm a parent in Open Ed, and I love this program. I'll just say that out front. But I did have a follow-up question about if the main issue has been about how much money the districts are keeping, which I also agree with you on that. I think they do keep a large portion of it. Why does the bill remove the entire district vendor model instead of capping or standardizing those administrative percentages so that we can continue with the program we have now, but have some tighter reins on what the districts are keeping?
So I think that so first of all, that's a really great question, and I appreciate that. I the direction that we are that there's a the direction that we proposed essentially was there's actually two options. That the second option doesn't get much it doesn't get much consideration, but really there's two options. So option one is what we've mostly been talking about, which is if you want to be able to operate as a homeschool family without uh, oversight, without interference, if you will, from the district in terms of the state education requirements, assessments, all of that kind of thing. Then really, when Open Ed was originally set up as My Tech High, and this was all original, there wasn't really a Utah fits all option. And what we're doing in this context is more aligned in principle with the Utah fits all framework. And so that was the thought, and that was the reason for the legislative auditor's recommendation, and the original proposal was to move that way. That doesn't preclude or prevent a district from continuing to provide educational services in a similar framework. But the challenge that we have, and this is something that I know is an important issue to the individuals on this call, we don't really have a good framework to be able to say, hey, a local education agency, school district, charter school, you're receiving state funding for the following students, but you have no oversight, no responsibility for the learning outcomes, for the proficiency, for the assessment and accountability for those students. And so, really, what we're trying to do is preserve the education options that the parents who are choosing this model value. We're trying to preserve those benefits while simultaneously allowing the district, if they say, look, we want to have alternative learning models, they can. And they have the ability to continue to support them. But essentially, what we have is a state-funded model that falls in the lane of what would be considered more traditional state accountability. It doesn't have to be the same learning model, but more traditional state accountability. And then one that fits in the framework of, I want to be able to access a resource that will help support my students' education. It does have state support, but it's in a different framework and a different model, consistent with the one that many of you have chosen. The difficulty, to be very upfront, the difficulty is in the situation where you say, "Hey, I'm a parent and I have students who are participating in the Open Ed framework, and I'm doing my own, I'm providing my own learning objectives and learning outcomes and supporting my student, and I want to be able to access certain resources within the district." Utah Fits All was designed to allow that feature to work where you could use some of those resources to essentially purchase a la carte resources from a local education agency, but it's not really built out and not really functioning well. So I think one of the concerns is in the short run, there is a concern where you might be saying, hey, I'm using some resources at the local school, dual immersion, it might be extracurricular activities, it might be some of those things. And there is some effort and some work that needs to be done to clarify how you can use, if you chose to be in the model where you want to, I'm using Utah Fits All because that's kind of the framework that the bill proposed. But if you're in that model, you want to still contract with and receive benefits from the district to utilize some of those resources that you may have traditionally been utilizing. There's some work that needs to be done to help facilitate those lanes, because right now they're not, I think, functioning in the way that some thought that they might, by having, for example, districts become Utah Fits All providers that would then offer particular suites of services to families. So I do recognize that that is a important component that needs to be worked through, but I do appreciate the follow-up question. I think it's a very, very important question.
One more follow-up for you, Representative.
Mhm.
Because so many students are experiencing this opportunity instability, they are nervous about being able to continue with the classes they're currently taking or were taking before UFA at their local district schools. Will schools be required to register as UFA providers so that all students can partake in the opportunities at their local school?
The answer is I don't think we're going to compel all districts. You know, right now the services being provided are primarily three districts, at least for open ed, and to my knowledge, one district for Harmony. So the answer is I don't think that there would be a need to compel, for example, all LEAs to become providers in the Utah Fits All program. I think the intent is to try and work with these service providers to work with these local education agencies to be able to continue to figure out how to provide services for students that are wanting to benefit from them. One of the fundamental difficulties in this particular conversation, and I think it's important to just articulate it and try and be transparent about it, is um, if you start to group if you start to group education, public education in the state of Utah, um, into these lanes that I've talked about, traditional in-person learning, online, both funded by the state, right? And then we move to the Utah Fits All program, and then we move to a traditional homeschool program, which is not participating at all in state support. One of the complications is when we start crossing over, and that's really what this particular question, follow-up question, is about. And there are challenges because I'll just see if I can be again as open and transparent as I can. There's one of the reasons why many of the families that are on the call today and that will be listening in are choosing the model is because you want to have, you know, control over the curriculum and the learning environment and the overall educational experience as a parent of a child who's participating in a homeschool supported option. The challenge is when you introduced state funds. And one of the real challenges is that by statute, there's a requirement for state funds to come with essentially this state resource effective assessment to inform high quality instruction and accountability. And what's happening is we're running into those conflicts where we're saying, hey, we want to have access to state funds and state support, but we don't want to participate in the assessment and the accountability and et cetera. And I'm not saying it has to be all one way or all the other, but what I'm trying to articulate is the challenge is as we're developing education models and choice in education. One of the challenging things to navigate is allocating a state resource that doesn't then have a parallel or a complementary lane for example, you know, if you show up and you're participating in a traditional district school in a brick and mortar concept, there's a particular level of accountability and, frankly, a very large number of state statutes that regulate what happens there. And then we want to also have access to the same funds and resources, but without that accountability. And the issue is it creates an issue at the district level. It also creates an issue at the state level, and which is one of the reasons why the audit made a couple of recommendations about how to move forward. None of them are perfect. And that's the intent of getting the bill out early and trying to have good opportunities for feedback and try and figure out what that should look like. But I think that I'll just summarize by saying we're not trying to make the program go away. We're not trying to force the districts or the charter schools into a particular outcome. we're trying to preserve parent choice and also, frankly, the local education agency choice. But we're also trying to say, look, there are lanes where parents are responsible for the curriculum, the learning environment, the learning objectives, etc. And there are lanes where the state has allocated money to a district or a charter school in an LEA format, and they are responsible for those learning outcomes. And it's kind of hard to be all the state funding with none of the accountability in the same lane, and that's one of the things that we're running into. That's why we're trying to essentially allow the individuals that are participating an option to preserve the choice and optionality that you value.
Okay, thank you. A follow-up to that, you were talking about accountability and assessments. Megan is wondering what that means exactly, the accountability. Currently, Open Ed and Harmony students are required to submit reporting, portfolios, that sort of thing, for their accountability. She's wondering if accountability assessments would require in-home visits or testing or just reporting and pictures and portfolios like we've been doing in the past.
The answer is I don't think that my legislation would articulate that. Ultimately, when we talk about accountability and assessments, currently, when we say, and I'll use this as an example, when we say Nebo School District, how are they performing at third grade proficiency? Third grade's a big discussion topic right now. How are they performing on both literacy and numeracy metrics that are assessed over the various time that a student is participating? And the state has a number of metrics that they use to determine whether or not Nebo School District is succeeding or not succeeding at meeting those outcomes. The students that are participating in Open Ed, which I think there's about 13,000 students enrolled in Open Ed as part of the Nebo School District program, they're not included in any of those results. Now, all the funding is there, but none of the either the proficiency, none of the assessments, none of that is there. And so partly we're trying to figure out, partly the question is like, what should that actually look like? Because we don't want to incentivize districts to take state money and then ultimately tell them you can take a large amount of state money, but you have no accountability for what happens with that money. That's a long-term problem that can create a number of issues, which is why the Tooele School District audit was done previously because of some of those issues. So anyway, I think it's a really good question. It's as much a financial question and a resource allocation question as it is what happens in the homeschool framework. But the districts they're navigating that slightly differently. So there's not a statewide, hey, it has to be this particular outcome.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move on to another question here.
By the way, Karen, one of the things I'm trying to do is to say, look, for the families that are participating in this program, ideally there should be a couple of options. Option number one is you can stay outside all of those assessment and accountability frameworks. That's what Utah Fits All essentially does, right? Or the district can enhance the offering and the accountability and retain certain types of student options. They just can't be exempt from the accountability that all of their other students are required to participate in. So really it becomes more of a parent choice than it is just a district choice.
Can I have a comment on that, Nina? I just before we leave this topic, this is Representative Peck.
Go ahead. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Okay, thank you.
Yes.
I really, really appreciate the sensitivity to the assessment question. that Representative Walter is doing here and how he's really trying to nail this. I understand the problem that they're facing with the districts and this like loose money that then creates really big problems with our education systems working properly, and they're trying to rein that in. And I guess what I'm saying is that if they're going the Utah fits all way is the best way to protect people from having to have their kids be tested and stuff like that. And I think that's why there's people leaning toward let's have it go that route, because then we wouldn't have to do testing. I worked my guts out when Utah Fits All happened to protect Utah families from having to have their homeschool children subjected to testing. And I will fight to the death on that forever because I don't think it's right. And so I love that Representative Walter is saying, okay, we know that this money is the way that it's working is not according to the way it's supposed to be happening. But we also know that parents don't want their children to be tested. But we also know that Utah Fits All provides a portfolio system, which it puts a lot more, it like the families in the driver's seat about what they turn in that portfolio, which is totally different than having to be subject to state testing. And so I think that's why it is a viable option to go that direction, even though it is a change for families. We also have to make sure that the districts aren't basically, I mean, just taking money from homeschool families and using homeschool families like a cash cow, but not actually doing anything with that money. I mean, that's exploitation of homeschool, really.
I just want to add one other thing. I know one of the really big concerns on from that's been expressed both in the chat and in some of the questions is related to stability. It's really, it can be really terrifying when you're participating. Tooele School District was supporting the program. You were using certain of those resources, and then they say, we're just not going to support this anymore. And now 10,000 students overnight have to find a new place to house their program, reconnect with new district resources, reconnect with new class offerings, and et cetera. So one of the things we're hoping to do is create really longer term stability about how these offerings can work in the Utah Fits All program. But I just want to put a big asterisk by that. We're aware that there's issues with the implementation. And so that's why we have proposed a delayed and phased implementation so that we don't overwhelm that program or system. So I appreciated Nicolene's comments about the sensitivity about these issues because we really are trying not to be not to rush into a set of circumstances that would be wildly disruptive once again.
Yes, thank you, Representative Walter. We just want to reiterate again our thanks for being here and hearing us out and for not rushing into this and being willing to understand our needs as a homeschool community. We really appreciate it. The biggest thing I'm hearing right now from our parents is just to clarify with you, to be clear, if this law takes effect completely in, what did you say, 2 to 3 years, that we would stay with open ed and then roll into UFA. When that happens, parents who are currently sending their children to their local school, and to be clear, we're sending our children to our local neighborhood school that we are zoned for. Like I live in Syracuse, I don't have to send my kids to Tooele to take a class. They can go to their local Davis County school. Will that option end because Open Ed and Harmony are phasing out? Will we have to choose between UFA funds and being on, say, the track team at the local school?
The answer to that question is it's nuanced. So your comment is about participating on the track team. And I think that's a different question than maybe, for example, being able to participate in the Spanish class that's offered, on a particular schedule. And I think if I'm just very honest, I don't know the answer to all those nuances or details. I think the intent is to try and preserve as much of that optionality as possible. But it does require, it's going to require working with the education providers. I don't understand how the transfer of funds is working between, for example, your Syracuse school and the Nebo School District. I think
Mhm.
something is happening there so that there is a reimbursement of some kind. At least there should be, but I just am just being very honest. I don't know enough about the intricacies of those funding reimbursements to be able to say this is exactly how it works and this is exactly how it's going to work in the end. I think the intent is to try and preserve as much optionality as we can, but it does require participation from the school districts. And we need to get the Utah Fits All program more functional in terms of requesting these a la carte services. So it's a great question, and I'm sorry I don't have a concrete, clear, definitive answer for you.
Okay, thank you. We hope to hear more about that as maybe as the session moves along. I
So, by
know
the way, I
also,
just noted it in the chat. So, Elaine said, when I enrolled my child for classes at the local school, I paid with my Harmony funds to the school. So, nothing in the Utah Fits All program would prohibit you from doing that, right? In fact, if anything, there's a chance that it might actually increase the funds a little bit. You'd have more opportunity to increase the funds over time. So, I think that I appreciate Elaine posting that in the chat.
yes, thank you, Elaine. Uh, the other thing that we're hearing along these same lines is parents are concerned about special ed services. How will that be affected? Currently, they are going through Open Ed or Harmony to access special ed services at their school, things like speech therapy, therapies that their children might need that are best provided at their local school. How will that be
Yeah.
affected?
I think it's the same. The idea, the principle behind Utah Fits All was that you'd be able to contract for those kinds of educational support services with the Utah Fits All funds, right? So in concept, again, I'm we're pretty far down in the particulars, and I don't claim to be an expert on that, but I'm just telling you conceptually, it would seem that the intent would be that you'd be able to continue to access services using funds or resources that are allocated to you in that regard. So,
Right. And that again is dependent on whether or not your school district will contract with UFA. Is that correct?
so the answer to that is potentially yes. I think right now what I'm also acknowledging is it sounds like what you're describing is you're going to a local boundary school for services, and somehow there is an exchange of payment or support between the districts. And I don't know exactly how that works. That's something we're just going to have to look further into.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you. I'm going to move on to another question at this time. Okay, this question comes from a homeschool mom. She says, why does this bill prioritize a limited pre-approved vendor marketplace over reimbursement-based models that allow families to choose the most appropriate local and cost-effective educational providers?
So again, I'm just going to go back to when Open Ed, previously My Tech High, really began. There was no essentially alternative, and there was no alternative to essentially having access to state resources and providing a homeschool, home-directed option. And there still is some debate about whether or not technically the programs, as they've evolved, whether they were something that was explicitly authorized or if it was something that was authorized to accommodate a need that didn't really have a better legislative solution. With the introduction of Utah Fits All 3 years ago, it's it's not, the program isn't mature. And so it's important, I think, to recognize that what we're looking at today isn't the final version. But what is, I think everybody that has supported Utah Fits All is agreeing is that we want to provide an option for a state scholarship. So state funds to parents in the form of a scholarship where the parents can direct the spending related to their children's education. And really, we have more work to do in developing and articulating those lanes over time. But in the long run, a homeschool option where parents are in control of the curriculum, the learning environment, the learning objectives, etc. Right? In the long run, at least in our current framework, it's a better fit in the Utah Fits All framework, where the parents still have the ability to access or seek out resources that might be provided by a traditional district in a framework that is aligned with the principles and essentially this framework for Utah Fits All. So I just want to acknowledge and recognize, which I think is an important consideration for the folks on the call, that we're still very early in the Fits All, and there's work that needs to be done. But with time, I do think that we're going to make some progress that won't resolve all of the concerns I think that are expressed, but some of them will be better addressed with time.
Okay, thank you. I think we have time for maybe a couple more questions here. Let's move on to, why is this bill moving forward before UFA has demonstrated long-term stability and while legal challenges remain unresolved? And what safeguards are in place to prevent families from being harmed during the transition if this bill becomes law?
The reason why we're trying to move forward is it's a very, very, very large amount of money that's being allocated to LEAs that's not actually going to students. Now, some of the LEAs would dispute that, or they would take issue with that. But the funds that are being allocated to that local education agency aren't getting to they're not getting to the students. Most of those funds are not. That's a concern from the legislature, especially in a year where there is discussion about maybe having to take a 5% across the board cut to make sure that we can accommodate President Trump's big beautiful bill and the implications to income tax revenue that will come from that. We don't want to raise taxes for certain, and so a lot of that impact is going to come in the income tax fund, which funds public education primarily, including the Utah Fits All scholarships. And so we're trying to be very thoughtful about the fiscal impacts of a challenging environment where families are under pressure to be able to buy basic necessities. Housing prices are at all-time highs and very challenging from affordability standpoint. The grocery store is not getting any cheaper. And the state is trying to be careful with and judicious with the limited resources that it has. As a legislator, I don't want to come to you and ask for more money. I definitely don't. And if there's a way we can figure this out that allows you as a homeschool community to be able to pursue your education priorities while simultaneously allowing us to work through some of the budget dynamics, I think that's something we're talking about.
And we thank you for that. As homeschool families, many of us are single income families and are worried about the loss of opportunity that would come with the loss of funding from Open Ed and Harmony. And the question is, currently UFA is built on income tiers and lotteries, and we're wondering if every family currently guaranteed funding through an ESP will be guaranteed access to the opportunities that funding provides under this new system? Or will income tiers, lotteries, or wait lists result in some families losing those opportunities and educational support?
The way the bill's drafted right now is everybody that is in an open ed Harmony, one of these programs will be essentially moved to and grandfathered into the Utah Fits All without having to go through lotteries or qualification tiers.
Will those tiers continue to exist for new students applying for the scholarship?
I think that's one of the issues that we're going to have to debate in the as the bill as we have discussions about the bill. So I understand very clearly the question. I think the underlying question is also it's also a funding question. And I think part of that will probably be related to the litigation that was referred to. If the litigation ends favorably and Utah Fits All scholarships are upheld, then what's likely to happen is you'll see additional resources moving that direction, which will, I think, be really important part of the consideration. So I think time is going to help us out as we move forward.
Okay.
By the way, you
Jennifer,
can already see that historically because Utah Fits All was originally the first year was funded with 40 million, then it was added an additional 40 million, so it's at 80 million. This would add a very large, I don't know the exact dollar amount, but this move would add another very substantial amount to the Utah Fits All scholarship program, while net saving the overall education budget resources.
okay, thank you. Jennifer is telling us that UFA is more restrictive in what is reimbursed. Even things that would be allowed in a classroom or school setting are not allowed through UFA, but currently Open Ed and Harmony provide flexibility for that and will provide those items. She is wondering if UFA will be allowing for those items that Open Ed and Harmony have been providing in the past.
Yeah, so again, you guys are probably more experienced with the nuances of the reimbursement challenges and nuances, and so I think the intent is that these programs are functioning. They've been functioning for a long time, for lack of I don't know a specific amount of time, and so the idea would be that we want to try and keep it as simple as possible, but I'm not the program. I just want to be clear, like I'm not the program manager, and I don't know the specific nuances of where some of those reimbursement challenges are. Our intent is to be able, the intent for Utah Fits All from the beginning was to reimburse for the students' education experience. Last session we had a hearing and there was discussion about some of the abuses that were related to that in Utah Fits All. And so there is some concern out there, but again, this is a program that's been around a long time, and the way at least the bill read was that the way the bill is crafted is that the Open Ed and Harmony programs could be essentially lifted and moved. So the intent would be that you'd be able to continue with the current programming. I can't foresee all of the potential reimbursement challenges just because I just don't have that experience at that level.
Okay.
So I just
Okay,
want to clarify, I just noticed in the chat. So making this move, it won't push any of the Utah Fits All students out. What we would propose to do is the existing Utah Fits All students that are there, they'd be there. We'd just be moving the program from essentially being funded through the school local education agencies, the districts or the charter schools. That funding would just go through the Utah Fits All model. So there'd be a small reduction in the funding that goes to the various local education agencies, and there'd be an increase of funding to compensate to offset in the Utah Fits All program, so that net the program, whether you're in the Utah Fits All program, would be the same. If you are in the open ed program, it would be the same. If you're not participating in any program and you're a homeschool parent and you don't want to have anything to do with any of this, you're still out. It's all the same as it was. That's the intent.
That's the good news, huh?
Okay, so just to clarify, it sounds like you're saying that the language is still evolving on this bill, that you're still looking to address some of these issues and to find the best way
Every
to do
bill's
so.
language is evolving until the day the governor signs. So the answer is, there's a lot of people that have taken a look at this in the education community, but we're a long ways away from having a passed bill. There was a committee hearing in the interim, but this bill is going to have to be it's going to have to be reintroduced into a House committee. It'll have to, if it makes it past the House committee, it will go to the House floor. If it's passed by the House floor, it'll have to go to a Senate committee, presumably the Senate Education Committee, and then to the Senate floor. And so this bill does, I just want to make sure everybody knows, like we have, there's going to be a lot of discussions. And so to presume that nobody will make any amendments or substitutes to this bill between now and wherever its final destination is would be a faulty assumption.
All right,
Fair
thank
enough.
you. All right, let's see. We
I
have,
have time for one more.
yeah. Let's see which to choose. We have quite a few questions coming through on the chat.
I know I'm
As you
having
can
trouble
see.
reading them as fast as they're coming in. There's some great comments in there. So I appreciate the thoughtful participation from your participants here today.
Okay. Well, as you have also been watching the chat with us, is there anything that you would like to add that you think might help to clarify?
The intentions and effects of this bill if it is passed.
Yeah, I think I'm going to say something that's probably not and the easiest thing to say on this call, but I think it's an important thing to navigate. We're trying really hard. I'm trying really hard I'm one of 104 legislators, so please understand that. I'm trying really hard to preserve our homeschool options. I already mentioned this in the beginning. I have a son, my youngest son. We homeschooled. He got behind his COVID year, was really struggling, and his reading was just really lagging. And my wife said, "This is the right choice for our son, and this is how we're going to help him get caught up." And she was right, and it made a big difference. And he's doing very well. And my son at the time, or now, he's in a district school, and that's partly his choice and what he wants to do. But the point is that I care about this option. I have a number of my nieces and nephews that are participating in these options. Some of them are in open ed. Like I care about what happens to the program. But I also realize that we have a I don't want to say a conflict in statute, but we have the implementation of what's in statute creates some potential long-term structural conflicts. And it originates from the idea that when we're taking state money that comes from, it's either property tax or income tax, but it's primarily income tax in this case. When we take those funds and then we allocate them for education purposes, the state had to be very, very careful in setting up the scholarship, the Utah Fits All scholarship, because it is a scholarship. It's not a district allocation to a family. And so one of the challenges that we have in making sure that you guys many of you are aware about the litigation that's out there, but the state's argument from the very beginning when we set it up was that this is a scholarship to support education, and we're supporting parents' choice in education. And the program manager was set up in a way to protect parents' choice. It was very important that when all that was set up, that parents who chose not to participate in that program wouldn't be impacted. If they were choosing to be in a traditional homeschool framework, that they would not be impacted, and that's still the case. But what we're wrestling with in part is we have to be very clear, we have a hybrid model where we're allocating state dollars to a school district for a homeschool use. And while in principle I don't have any personal problem with that. That's a bigger issue in the potential, at least from what little bit I know about. I'm not an attorney, that's not my profession. But what's going on in the Utah fits all, what the plaintiffs are saying in challenging Utah fits all is that it's education funding that's going to families, and that's unconstitutional. And what the state is saying is it's an education scholarship, and it's different. And so one of the concerns that I have is in the long run, where we have this hybrid model. If we don't clarify those lanes, we have lots of potential issues with. I already mentioned the assessment and accountability requirements that are imposed on districts and charter schools, particularly in traditional learning environments. And there's this other component where we're sending state funds for not just an education purpose, but to a school that then is being allocated to a family. That again, I'm not an attorney, and I got to be careful here, but from my understanding is that is the center of the complaint from the plaintiffs trying to challenge Utah fits all. And if that were that could be a big problem as time moves on. And so if we can get those lanes lined up, we try and preserve the optionality. We preserve parent choice. I think we have a great choice framework where parents are choosing a traditional in-person option. They're choosing an alternative learning environment that is provided by a traditional LEA, whether it's a charter school or a district. We have more autonomy, but with state scholarships in what we've created as the Utah Fits All program, which will continue to build out and get better, right? And then we have you're a fully autonomous parent and children doing your education without without interference or oversight from the state. Like those seem like those are the right lanes based on what I know today. And so that's part of the context for what we're trying to accomplish.
Okay, thank you. If we could, are we go to 8 or 8:30?
We were scheduled to 8:15.
15. Oh,
So
great.
we have a
So we have.
I'm good to go as long as it works for your participants and Karen and Nina, the moderators here.
Oh,
So
great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, this question comes from the chat. It says, this is a concern I have when every program offering funding becomes absorbed by one government-run entity, it destroys a free market system. Many of us homeschooling families have different children with different scholarships or funding programs. We've benefited by being able to choose the best fit for each individual child based on what each program offers. What's the benefit of putting everything under one umbrella?
I don't think we're trying to put everybody on one umbrella. I think that what we're trying to do here is preserve the options that parents have for various educational choice. So I don't think that what we're doing here is either undermining or in any way reducing that choice. We're moving some of the we're clarifying some of the lanes, but I don't think that we're removing specific options or trying to reduce the amount of choice.
Okay. Yeah, I love that and I can appreciate that. I'm sure many of our parents here agree with me. So just to be clear, then you're saying that with this bill, open ed and harmony could still exist, but instead of going to the district, to have the funding come through their different districts, that the funding would come through UFA instead, and there would be more oversight with the funds that way. So the question is,
I wouldn't say there's more oversight. I think actually UFA in the long run is going to give you more, ultimately more flexibility. So
okay,
let me give you
so
an example. Again, let me just give
okay,
you an example. At Tooele, it's decided, hey, we're having concerns. So their oversight response was to say, we're not supporting the program anymore. Everybody has to move. I think that we're trying to reduce, frankly, we're trying to reduce that risk.
okay. So this is a question from Tiana. I hope I'm saying that right. Tiana McCall. She says, as drafted, the vendor transition language appears to limit spending to tuition, required fees, and materials purchased through the vendor, which seems narrower than standard UFA allowable uses. Is that intentional, or is the language still evolving?
So I think definitely the language is still evolving. And what I mean by that is the intent isn't to try and create a more restrictive, less functional program that reimburses families less dollars than UFA. That's not the intent. The intent is to try and figure out how to do what the legislative auditors recommended, which was to move the existing program from the existing LEAs to Utah fits all, where it's better aligned with the principles of the program as a choice option. Recognizing that this isn't UFA, we're not trying to make it UFA, but the idea is that we're trying to, in terms of the way that it's the principles line up, that's what the legislative auditors suggested, and that's essentially what we're looking at.
Okay, so I hear what you're saying. So can I give you a real world example?
Sure.
So for example, UFA will not cover the cost of the purchase of, let's say, a violin or a flute or something, so your child can take lessons. They won't cover the cost of the instrument itself, but they will cover the rental. So I could rent the instrument for 5 years, pay it off twice over with my UFA funds, or with Open Ed, I could purchase that instrument and get reimbursed for it. Will I still be able to have that purchase option after this bill were to go through? If it were to go through, would I be able to still purchase my instrument if I were to choose to stay with Open Ed under the UFA?
I think there's two assumptions that have to be made to answer that question, and both of them have problems. The first one is that UFA reimbursement rules will never change based on what they are. And I don't think that's quite right. I don't think that's quite right. The second one is that Open Ed reimbursement rules will never change from what they are. And I don't think that's quite right either. And so I think what's going to happen over time is both programs are going to have either minor or more significant changes in their reimbursement programs. Theoretically, if they're in the same framework, then there should be some better alignment between them. That doesn't mean that Open Ed has to move to be UFA. Doesn't mean that UFA has to move to be Open Ed. It just means that we're trying to figure out what is the like what do we what's the appropriate reimbursement framework for these programs in a lane that is consistent with the principles that have established them. And I just think that right now it's too early to figure all of that out. So I think that's a difficult question to answer because it presumes that both reimbursement programs are static and that they won't change. And I think over time, both of them will experience at least some movement or evolution.
Okay. Will the bill, and I know it's evolving, but as written, will the bill place caps for things like tuition on the Open Ed transitioning students?
Will the bill place caps on Open Ed
Yeah,
transitioning
so
students? What do you mean?
UFA right now will only provide, they have a cap on how much you can spend in certain categories, whereas Open Ed and Harmony don't have that.
So again, my understanding was, and again, I'm not an expert on the nuances of the reimbursement. My understanding was that we would move the program and open ed would be able to function in its current capacity just under the UFA lane, right, of education options. So I don't. I think the only way I can answer that question is we're not trying to restructure the reimbursement programs or the caps of open ed by moving it to the Utah Fits All program. That's not the intent.
Okay. We're going to look for another question here.
You've got lots of choices. There's lots of comments.
Oh, many.
Yes, there are. Okay, taking a look here. So what if this bill is passed and places the programs under a transition to UFA? What would be the status if UFA loses in the court?
Then so first of all, I think that what you're presuming is that it will take longer for the court to figure out what to do than it will take for the transition, right? So we're already proposing a 3-year transition. You're proposing that the court would rule after the 3 years is over, and then there was a transition after that. So if you follow me there. Because otherwise, we're going to have time to figure that out before the transition happens, and that's an easier question. If we get to that point, we have a bigger problem, which is it's not just the open ed students, it's all the UFA scholarship participants that we have to figure out how to navigate, and we'll be trying to figure out how to navigate those dynamics in the context of whatever that outcome is. We wouldn't have passed UFA and we wouldn't be defending Utah Fits All if we didn't believe the scholarships were constitutional. And if a lot of attorneys who took a lot of time looking at that didn't think that it was constitutional. Now, we can have a whole conversation about the courts and what will happen or what might not happen and et cetera. But I'm anticipating that we'll have, I'm hopeful that we'll have a resolution of that before the transition or the implementation of the bill would take place.
Would it be possible for Open Ed or Harmony or any similar program to become a UFA vendor so that the money transitioned through UFA to Open Ed or Harmony, similarly to the way it right now transitions through a district?
So you guys are going to probably laugh, but I thought that's what we've been talking about all the time, the whole time.
Okay, just wanting to clarify that that's what we're looking at. And we have a question that keeps coming up. They're saying right now there are different funding amounts based on people being low income or in poverty under UFA. They are prioritized. Is that going to continue to be the case if this bill passes and all of the programs are integrated into UFA? Will new students applying for the programs be subject to the income restrictions that are currently a part of UFA?
I should have said this an hour ago. I think it would have been much simpler. The way that I think about this is if you're a UFA, Utah Fits All scholarship recipient, and you elect to participate in a private school, you can use those funds to pay tuition, right? In my mind, and maybe this is overly simplistic, but if you are a open ed student and the program moves to Utah Fits All, then all you do is say, I want to be a open ed student, just like you say, I want to be a particular choose your private school, Challenger Academy. I want to be a student, and that pays your tuition, right? I don't know if that's overly simplistic, but that's when we sat down and looked at this and started figuring out which recommendation of the auditor's 3 proposals we thought might be the best fit. To me, that seemed pretty straightforward. I won't say perfect. I recognize there's always issues, but that seemed pretty straightforward. Instead of electing a private school tuition with your scholarship, with your Utah Fits All scholarship funds, you're now a Utah Fits All scholarship student who can elect to participate, who's elected to participate in open ed or Harmony.
Okay. Currently, home educated students who are not on a scholarship are permitted dual enrollment. Students who are participating in a program like Open Ed are permitted to take 2 classes at their local school. UFA scholarship students are only permitted to take a class or an extracurricular activity at the local school if the school has chosen to be a UFA vendor, and most schools have not chosen to do so. What options will be available after integrating the programs to ensure that people who depend on dual enrollment will still have that accessible to them under the new, more comprehensive UFA program? Because a lot of families depend on dual enrollment for interventions for young children. Perhaps they need some speech therapy, for example. And you can, special ed and so on. There are a lot of different cases, but we're hearing concerns that parents want to make sure they will still be able to access these services if the programs integrate.
Yeah, the short version is uh, there's a long arc between where we are and 3 or 5 or more years down the road, and the answer is I don't know. The bill does not compel every school district or charter school to be either an LFA, Utah Fits All participant, or to be a service provider, or it doesn't do that. And so I recognize that there is some resources that over time open ed students have been able to access and participate in. I don't have a definitive answer to that question about what services will be essentially available to contract or not available to contract by the districts. I can just tell you we're not requiring the districts to or charter schools to be Utah Fits All providers. I've got legislative fiscal analysts going through my head. Utah Fits
That's quite
All
all right.
Utah Fits All providers. The bill doesn't do that. So.
Okay. Is there any possibility of removing the current restriction that does not allow UFA students to dual enroll?
I know there's some discussion about that. I don't know if that'll end up in this bill, but I do know that there's discussion about that particular. I think right now the issue there is one of the same ones that you've articulated, is that there's um, uh, a need to get the program manager functioning at a stable level that's allowing everybody to move forward. And so I think the answer to that is that's probably a policy question that's more than just this particular discussion. I know that there's been a lot of discussion about that particular issue.
Okay. Another question we have from the chat. Since this is obviously, like all bills, this is evolving as you make adjustments and find even better solutions to things. They're asking whether you would be open to having a committee of individuals who use these programs to help with the wording of the bill.
So with any legislation, the legislation that the most recent draft is public. I'm open to any recommendations or suggestions. I think that you have a number of legislators who are very, very closely not just watching but engaged in this particular issue. And so my recommendation would be as we actually get to the process where we come to the committee, like provide your I don't provide your feedback. I think honestly, Representative Nicolene Peck is a great person. Like, get us your feedback, let us know your concerns, and let's see if we can work through them because we're going to be trying to work through. We haven't talked very much about it, but there are very significant concerns from the local education agencies, the school districts and charter schools, particularly those that are providing these services. There's very significant concerns from the State Board of Education about how it's overseen and how all of that works. And so there's a whole range of things that we're trying to navigate here with regard to the proposed legislation. And so the answer is I'm not opposed to having any feedback from anybody, and I think that if there's a group of you that want to weigh in and participate, I think that sounds really great. I know that there's a number of legislators who are very, very closely watching this issue. Representative Peck is obviously here this evening, but there's a number of them who have, frankly, strong feelings about how this goes and where it moves and what it ultimately looks like. And so we're going to be trying to work with everybody to see if we can find the right balance. Ideally, that's what I'd like to do. I don't think I know everything or have all the solutions. We're just trying to move forward and recognize that by trying to solve one problem, which I articulated at the beginning, sometimes you create other problems, and we're trying to navigate to minimize those.
Okay, thank you. So just to follow up with that, if we have suggestions or questions after this meeting ends, should we contact you directly or Representative Peck or our local representative? Where do you
I
recommend that
think
we go?
I would just say that whatever you're most comfortable with, you're welcome to reach out to me. You guys did, which I appreciate. I did. Sometimes email or just communications where we don't try to. I can speak. I'm speaking for me, but I also speaking for the colleagues that I know. Nobody's trying to like lose communication. So we'll do the best we can. But if you're more comfortable with another member, somebody that you know, somebody that you have a relationship with, I think that's great as well. I do think there's going to be quite a few people that'll be ultimately engaged on this issue, and so I don't want to make it seem as though I'm not interested in your feedback, and I don't want to make it seem as though you can't go through somebody else. I just think there's going to be a lot of people engaged in this discussion.
And that's wonderful. We love that you're open to hearing from us. Looks like we have a hand raised. Amy Oswald, would you like to chime in?
Yes, sorry. I'm the secretary of UHOPE. But there was a question that I've had numerous people ask me. I put it in the chat, so I'll just read it. Will Harmony and open ed families who are transitioned into UFA, who have younger children who have yet to be school age during that transition time, will they need to be entered into the lottery, or will they be able to be grandfathered in like their older siblings are going to be if this bill passes? For example, I guess when the transition happens, if there's a 3-year-old in the family, I guess, is that something that could be considered? Because I think families would be worried about what possibly could come of that.
Yeah, a great question. I don't fully know the answer to that because it's partly depending on a couple of things that we just don't have our arms around now. So one is it's a future funding question, right? The second one is there's a demographic question about student age children in the state of Utah and how many of them are choosing various educational models. And so I think what you're seeing, I think it's easier for me to answer the question based on where we're at. What you're seeing right now is that there is support for parent choice in education. There's support for alternative education models, and there's funding that has been allocated for scholarships to accommodate parent choice in alternative education models. I can't bind if I can't make a statement that I think is going to guarantee, 3 years or 5 years or 7 years down the road. But I do understand exactly where you're coming from. I mean, like I told you, I was a board chair of two charter schools, and one of the really, really important things was if you already have students in that school and you want your younger children to be able to participate, that they have room for them in that school. And most of the time, that was not a problem. Sometimes it became an issue because the school was oversubscribed and there wasn't capacity, and we wanted to get them in, but we didn't have the ability to get everyone in. And I'm just trying to be as transparent and honest as possible. Is that we're trying to accommodate the families, but can I guarantee that every student who's potentially attached to a family member as a sibling will be guaranteed enrollment sometime in the future? Like that's a commitment of both resources and like programmatic that I'm not even sure if I know how to do that because of all of the limitations in general in the way that our education system works. And the only way I know how to answer that question is to give you my charter school example, where we're trying. We think that we've got resources to accommodate, but we don't know what the demographics are. We don't know what the future parental choice options are going to be. And we potentially may run into some situations like the charter schools where my children attended and I chaired, where we had preferential enrollment for siblings, but we just didn't have capacity in the school. We just didn't have space. And is that possible? Yeah, that's a possible outcome, which I know is not ideal, but I don't want to just tell you that it's not possible and try and make people feel good about something that I think we don't have control of today. So I'm just trying to be very transparent without trying to just sell all of you on something that I think is we're going to have to try and work through over time.
All right. Thank you so much for that, Amy. And thank you again for taking this time to speak with us tonight, Representative Walter and Representative Peck. I don't see your face right now, but I see you in the chat. I know you're here. Obviously not every concern. Oh, there you are.
Hi.
Not every concern can be addressed in one meeting, but I really appreciate you helping us to have a format where parents can be heard and express their concerns and get some feedback. And I will tell you, UHOPE is going to continue gathering feedback from parents and families around the state of Utah and continuing to talk with you, Representative Walter, and with our other representatives. I think we all share the goal of supporting families in giving their children the best education they can in Utah.
Yes, thank you to everyone who joined tonight for participating with us in this respectful forum. We appreciate all of you, your comments, your questions that you've submitted for supporting homeschooling in the state of Utah. We appreciate you all and have a good night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Bye.